Thank you, Rodrigo. Great to see you again. So I think in terms of mechanisms, I'll just keep it very short. I think we have basically two kinds of ideas about mechanism. One are state-based mechanisms. The other is, of course, non-state-based mechanisms in which you, again, distinguish between civil society networks, but also professional networks, academic networks, other networks of expertise or epistemic networks of various kinds. How do we actually sort of insert ourselves or leverage the capacities of one to bolster that of the others? I think that's kind of one way in which we can think about. In my own past work, I've tried to sort of encourage or leverage more the interaction between academic networks and social movements as networks who remain far from each other and who, by closer engagement, will hopefully find ways in which both capacity as well as effectiveness of their actions are improved over time. Now, in terms of state networks, I think that we have we of course have the formal human rights, state-based networks, including within states, the human rights, national human rights institutions, and judiciary, as well as, of course, across transnational space, the variety of regional and global human rights mechanisms, including the special procedure mechanisms in which we are engaged, and as well as the UPR, mechanism for review of state, performance of under human rights treaties and so on. I think that these remain, of course, valuable spaces, but given my time is short, I'm going to just focus on what I think might be the most effective ways of promoting, especially habitat rights and the right to the city. I think while there is some capacity for legal advocacy of the sort, for example, that social movements engaged in to bring about the acceptance of the Declaration on the Rights of Peasants. The Via Campesina movement was, for example, very critical in its engagement through the Committee on World Food Security. And that led to the acceptance finally of the Declaration on the Rights of Peasants. I don't rule out that we could, for example, have a similar kind of mobilizational action for what you could call as transnational lawmaking at the global level. But I do think that given the emergency situation in which we find ourselves, the amount of time and the expertise that goes into, pushing the boundary in that front, which has to be balanced against the amount of gains that you could have by selectively and strategically engaging at the level of cities, particularly on issues like rethinking or imagining, helping cities reimagine land governance. For example, through the idea of co-governance, as the city of Bologna has experimented with, for example, or experimenting with, disaggregating the idea of eminent domain to encourage a pluriversal acceptance of sovereignty, to take that word from Adriana. So there are many ways in which I think we could sort of partner with cities and city networks, and UCLG's role and that of other networks of cities that have emerged in the last 10, 15 years is something that I see as a crucial component of 21st century multilateralism or plurilateralism. And we should actually see these as the most important spaces. Now, the traditional state spaces still remain with us, but they are the legacy spaces of the 20th century. And they come with both the advantages, but also the baggage of the 20th century. So those are my initial responses to your comments.
Thank you, Raj. Having in mind that we are already running a little bit late, I would like to ask already for Victor to intervene, to take the floor. Please, Victor.
Thank you very much. Well, I have two angles from which I can share with you. The first one has to do with the specificity of my mandate, and the other one might be a bit more generic. And I believe on this I will be complemented by my colleagues as well, so that together we can actually kind of provide you the general information. So I trust that Felipe and Pedro will be able to take it up when my time is off and you just turn my microphone off. But I think it relates to specificity of my mandate. I am working on a whole pillar of work that relates to social inclusion. It's an expression that I've also heard Felipe mention today, and that many of my colleagues, all of whom work from the perspective of intersectionality, we understand that the great work of eliminating discrimination goes through agendas of social inclusion. And many of us have aligned our lines of analysis with great sectors of consideration and study, such as health, education, work, and shelter and housing in particular. So I think that there is a significant opportunity for specialized work, research, and organizations that want to bring visibility as to how the issues of habitat rights or urban considerations, city spaces actually interact with all of our areas. That is the practical way in which intersectionality is brought up to life, is when you understand how these very dimensions can be given visibility through language. And I think I can imagine that particular inputs in this relation are being sought on every aspect. And again, from my angle of analysis, all of my work of social inclusion will relate to that. Just wanted to stress some of the very specific common mechanisms that we all have. We have wide-ranging abilities in what concerns individual communications, which is when we hear about possibilities of breaches of human rights, and we are being given the angle of how those are actually interacting with the issues of your concern. We also issue calls for inputs in thematic reports. And I think that one of the most gratifying experiences that I have is when organizations working within particular angles have given me stuff to consider in relation to how our areas of interest coincide and how do we have spaces that are intersecting. And of course, the same thing in relation to country visits and country reports. One final thing that I'd like to say, again, in the hopes that my colleagues will be able to complement all of this perspective, has to do with animating the joint work of different special procedures. One of the most interesting possibilities is when we have the possibility of acting together because an issue exists in the interaction of different special rapporteurs, independent experts, or working groups. And clearly, many of the issues that concern you will happen in spaces in which our areas of concern intersect. And so if I take as example my joint work with Leilani Farha, the previous special rapporteur, in everything that concerns to the particular issue of homelessness amongst LGBT youth, it was a perspective that was brought forth by youth organizations that concerned themselves with urban space, lived realities of youth that identifies as LGBT. And that body of work was built as a thread almost exclusively with the individual intelligence that we received from civil society. So I'd like to motivate that this continues in time.
Thank you so much, Victor. Felipe?
Thank you. What I have seen over the years is an increasing presence of authorities from the local level and also organizations from the civil society at the local level at the international organizations. I was myself with the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights before, as Victor was as well. And I didn't see at that time, I'm talking about 5-10 years ago, I didn't see at that time such a strong participation as I see now as a special rapporteur at the UN. And I think this is a very important development. And I would like to mention especially one aspect, which is the participation of Association of Mayors and also from civil society organizations in the implementation and follow-up of the Global Compact on Migration. The Global Compact on Migration is a broad instrument which includes many components and not only the human rights one. And it's very important to enhance this human rights component. And that is my task as a special rapporteur on the human rights of migrants. And I think that for this, to achieve this objective, it's very important to have a strong participation from the local authorities and civil societies. So that's a point. And more generally, there is always the issue of having a permanent strong interaction with the local authorities and the local organizations. We all know that there are some organizations who don't have the resources to go to Geneva or to New York, and so it's important to have our means of communication. In fact, I was somehow trained for the pandemic, and this is not a joke, because not in sanitary terms, but in webinar terms. Because before the pandemic, I was already having webinars with organizations from around the world, especially as a means to achieve those organizations who are not the typical ones who can go to Geneva and New York, whose work is also very important, but to ensure that grassroots organizations, which is very important in the case of migrants, also have a direct link with my mandate.
Thank you so much, Felipe. Pedro?
Thank you very much. Well, I'm just beginning, so I am a little bit overwhelmed. But my way of thinking is I want to mainly to promote. First of all, of course, I am conscious that my topic, the question of water and sanitation, is strongly related with environmental, housing, health, with not all perhaps, with also remember now I'm discussing and collaborating with the mandate on indigenous peoples for example, because my next thematic report is human rights to safe drinking water and sanitation in indigenous peoples, communities and so on. So this is very clear. So I am ready for collaborating as much as possible and in the way that has been said already, not before. This is one question very, very clear for me. And the other question I'm trying to do is to build social network permanent dialogue with social movement. Now, just during this week, I had 4 meetings, crowded meetings, incredible. The one in Spanish, another in French, 2 others in English. But I don't want to have a dialogue for 1 day and another in 3 months or 4 months. I would like to build, of course, not because I want, but we need to build the motivation and to do for getting something, no? to conquer some question interesting for everybody, a permanent dialogue in order to reinforce the social movements in their activities worldwide. This is one important thing I will try to do. The other question is, as you said already, local municipalities, local institutions, because they are, as I said before, even in charge, responsible of water and sanitation services. So it's not just because they can support, no, they can implement the things that we have an agreement, the campaign we want to do, etc. It could be very practical. And I think in this sense, I'm here with you. I'm contacting and working, beginning to work with blue communities and so on. For me, is essential. And the third question, I don't remember who has told before, has said it before, is to build, I think it was Raj, a network of universities, educational centers, and experts, or in my case, in water issues. Because in alliance, with the human rights, and in this case with the social movements. And I had the practice because during a long time we built from Spain and Portugal and Latin America, for instance, the Foundation for the New Water Culture. And it is a powerful network on water issues with more than 80 universities and with strong alliances with local movements, with problems. And I think it's very important. We can do it. I have done before, and now I would like to do it around the Human Rights Council, now through my responsibility in my responsibility as rapporteur. Well, these are the three main questions in which, no, 4 questions in which I think we can and we will collaborate, and specifically with organization and networks as the one you represent. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Pedro. It's very good to hear from all of you that you are willing to meaningfully engage with civil society organizations and local governments. I think that we know that the UN system gives floor mainly to state members, and sometimes civil society and local governments, they have to struggle to be heard at the UN system. So it's very important to have your willingness to listen to us and also to engage with us meaningfully. And first of all, I'd like to thank you for that. But I would like to stress also one point that Pedro brought that I think it's crucial to move forward in this relationship among civil society, local governments, and the special rapporteurs and the special procedures. We have to establish permanent dialogues, permanent forums. I think that this opportunity that we have here today to talk with you about your vision and what are you going to prioritize regarding habitat rights and the right to the city, it's a very important space that we have to try to make it more open and permanent. And I think that all of our networks here today, such as the Global Platform for the Right to the City, Habitat International Coalition, UCLG, we're all open to do that and to work collaboratively with you in order to achieve that, because it has to have a permanent process to do that, because we have to feed this process and to grow them. And it's very important to have that in mind. And also, another point that I think it's important as well is the point raised about connecting also with academic and experts on the ground and on those themes. For instance, within the Global Platform for the Right to the City, we have a research and capacity building working group, which deals with many different academic networks and other experts that also can contribute for a lot of different issues that you are bringing to the table. We are actually planning to expand next year a round of thematic papers that we are already developing with a series of thematic that already were raised here today, such as climate change, access to public services, and inclusive citizenship for migrants as well, and etc. So I think there is a lot of common grounds here that we can develop in order to be stronger together, especially in the LGBTQ rights, water and sanitation, and also with, of course, housing rights. So I think we can move forward in this next few years together in that sense. And I think that's also very important because Pedro said something also that's very, I know how challenging it can be to begin in the shoes of a special rapporteur. It's not an easy task. And no, I know it's not, because you are dealing with a global issue, and that's difficult to work with being just one person. But we are all in this together. So that's a message that I wanted to share with you.